Madame Chara. Madame l'ambassadeur, s'il vous plaît. Thomas Bernard de l'USN pour venir présenter ces documents. Merci beaucoup.
Remercier le gouvernement des Comores pour l'accueil chaleureux et très bienveillant de tous les participants. Bien évidemment aussi remercier toutes les organisations partenaires pour l'organisation de cet événement, l'Union africaine, la COI, UNESI ici aux Comores. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici. Et aussi, j'aimerais aussi remercier tous les représentants des pays partenaires et partenaires techniques qui ont fait le déplacement pour participer tous ensemble à ces journées dédiées, à cette conférence dédiée sur l'économie bleue, les États insulaires, mais aussi la crise économique et géopolitique sont toutes interconnectées. Alors ça, bien évidemment, ça pose un énorme challenge, puisque ça veut dire qu'on ne peut pas résoudre ces crises sans aussi résoudre chacune des autres crises, mais c'est aussi une opportunité, parce que ça veut dire que du coup, si on arrive à développer une initiative qui permette de se faire le fer de lance justement de la résolution et des solutions à ces trois crises, on a du coup une chance de manière concomitante. Aujourd'hui, nous arrivons en fait à un croisement et les derniers rapports de la scientifique, de la IPCC et autres montrent clairement que nous avons encore une fenêtre d'opportunité pour choisir entre le meilleur et peut-être pas le pire des mondes, mais en tout cas un monde qui serait bien différent de celui que l'on connaît aujourd'hui, et en particulier pour les générations futures. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Aujourd'hui, you will have seen that the latest IPCC report actually sort of described that basically, as it is with the current pledges and the current policies, we're actually heading to hit 3.5 degrees of increase by the end of the century. And in fact, the 1.5 degrees, we're actually on track to hit them in the next 10 years, where we're not supposed to hit them by the end of the century. So we are not doing good at all. But yet, there is still an opportunity for us to actually make a change and really reverse the trend to go on the right path. But it also means that we are the last generation to be able to do so. We are here, the people here present in the room are actually the one in power in the right place to really be able to make a difference. So it's our responsibility to put things in march so that we can actually avoid the worst case scenario. When it comes to the ocean, of course, the ocean, in all transparency, is not doing good. It goes from ecosystem degradation to ocean warming to acidification, unsustainable fisheries. Our oceans are currently being depleted. Sea level is rising, whether we like it or not. And of course, extreme events, and here in particular in Comoros and in the Western Indian Ocean region, and in particular in the Mozambican Channel, you all know that far too well. Just to illustrate what, how dire the situation is. In terms of coral, we've already lost more than a third of all the corals in the world, and in fact, we're on the path to lose another third in the next 10 years. And just so you realize that what's the difference between hitting 1.5 or 2 degrees, at 2 degrees, we lose 99% of all the corals in the world. At 1.5, we lose 70%. As it is, as I just said, by 2035, we might actually already hit the 1.5 degrees. So that means that we'll already have lost a huge part of the corals, or eventually be on the tracks to do it, and completely lose them during this century. But again, there is a window of opportunity for us to avoid that. Sorry. When it comes to plastics, here also we're not doing very good. Every year, the world dumps 8 million tons of plastics, actually even more, because those are like sort of old figures. And by 2050, in fact, even before, we already project that there will be more plastics in the sea than there will be fish, that there will be life in the ocean. So just, take a moment to reflect on this and how dire the situation is and urgent the situation is. And when it comes to fish, sort of, the fisheries, what gives proteins and livelihoods to millions and billions of people around the world, we're already to a point where 80% of the fisheries are already overexploited, meaning that they are already sort of disappearing. And here we all know too well that, for instance, the yellowfin tuna is not doing great at all. And otherwise, sort of half of the other fisheries are already completely fully exploited, and there is no space to increase. But at the same time, we're also at the moment where never ever before there has been so much attention given to the ocean and to nature and climate. And here in particular, of course, it's illustrated by the nature, sort of this international agenda that calls for the world to build a nature positive world. But in fact, us as a UCN, and I don't know, our partners of the Great Blue Wall, including the African Union and UNECA, we strongly believe, in fact we know, that it's not possible to build a nature positive world without building a climate and people positive world. So here again, it goes back to the three interconnected crises. One cannot go without the other. And when it comes to the ocean, sure, the scientist, and I'm not a scientist, but I include myself in sort of that spirit, that we've sort of virtually divided the ocean in several oceans. But truth is, there is just one ocean. So that means, and why do I say that? First, for two reasons. You will see that the Indian Ocean, first of all, is the most interconnected ocean in the entire world. It's right at the center of everything. So it is absolutely critical for the Indian Ocean to really pull together in a collaborative and cooperative manner, and really also to start engaging much more actively with the rest of the world, because eventually what happens in the Indian Ocean affects the other oceans and vice versa. Now, how much time do we have left? 8 years. And we know that in the next 8 years, meaning by 2030, we need to be on the right tracks. And that means that as it is, as I just sort of explained before, we are not on the right tracks. In fact, we are still going on the wrong tracks. We're not even transitioning yet. It means that we need to completely shift the paradigm. We need to accelerate and upscale all the great work that is already ongoing, and we need to find a way to really accelerate that dramatically. And for us, one of the critical ways to do that is, of course, to develop an action-focused pathway, an ocean of opportunity which already exists, and unlock it by securing the highest level of political leadership. I mean, this is literally why we have presidents and heads of state. It's in their term of reference, it's in their job description to lead this type of transformation at that scale and at that speed, and to unlock an unprecedented level of public and private funding. Here we're talking about billions, if not trillions of dollars. To be able to actually accelerate and scale up such a transition towards a blue future. And that's very humbly what the Great Blue Wall is trying to achieve, at least to be part of and to contribute to. And the way that we intend to sort of support the partners and the countries and the Western Indian Ocean, the way we are sort of gearing up to achieve that is by supporting the establishment by 2030 of a connected network of regenerative seascapes. Now, just to be clear, the Western Indian Ocean, as much as it was the crib of the Great Blue Wall, does not mean it should be its limit. And in fact, we know that other countries here in the room are joining, are very, very interested to really support, together with the African Union, UNECA, and other partners, to really expand this at the Pan-African level, and we are committed to also support such an effort. Now, how do we actually intend to support the establishment of such a network? There is three key pillars that need to happen for us to be able to establish and really establish that network. The first one is very much aligned to the international biodiversity conservation agenda, in particular to the 30 by 30 target. We all know that as it is, in particular in the Western Ocean, we are still very far, in fact, around globally, we are very, very far from hitting the 30%. So we need to find ways and disrupt, in fact, the ways that we've been establishing those marine protected and conserved areas. So not only do they actually deliver positive outcome for biodiversity, but also for people and climate. I'm just going to elaborate a bit more on this, on how we're actually gearing up to establish those large-scale seascapes. The second pillar is much more aligned with the climate change agenda, and in particular in supporting the countries in achieving net gain of critical blue ecosystems. Here we're going to talk about mangroves, seagrasses, corals, coastal forests. To be very clear, here net gain, it's compared to 2020. That means that at the very least, we should have at least one mangrove more than we used to have in 2020. It might seem not much, but in fact that means that we need first to stop the degradation trend, and we need to considerably reverse the trend and restore so that by 2030 we achieve net gain, and we are on the right tracks to achieve full restoration of our blue natural capital in the next decades. And the third pillar, which is about blue economy, and in particular, here we're going to focus on what we call a regenerative blue economy that will produce positive outcomes for the people, for climate, and for biodiversity. And so here we want to be very deliberate in our focus on this and not to lose focus on other potential sectors. So, on parle justement de ces paysages marins ou regenerative seascape en français, en anglais, pardon. Là, l'intention, c'est véritablement d'aider les pays de la région et donc la région de manière générale, justement, à mettre en place des aires de conservation qui vont permettre non seulement de protéger la biodiversité et de la restaurer, mais en fait, et aussi de manière très importante, de mettre au centre les populations locales et de protéger leurs moyens de subsistance et de vraiment les aider justement à développer des activités économiques bleues, donc qui ont lien avec les ressources naturelles liées aux océans et aux côtes, pour faire en sorte qu'ils soient les premiers bénéficiaires, mais aussi les premiers managers de ces aires de conservation. C'est extrêmement important. Cela veut dire qu'on ne va pas mettre sous coupole 30% de l'océan d'ici à 2030 et qu'on va expulser les communautés locales, les pêcheurs. Bien au contraire, c'est plutôt on va mettre en place des mécanismes qui vont protéger leurs besoins, leurs activités économiques, et on va même pouvoir les promouvoir d'une manière bien sûr compatible aux objectifs de conservation de la biodiversité et aux objectifs climatiques. Pourquoi ? Parce que non seulement, bien évidemment, ils sont les premiers impactés par le changement climatique, mais aussi leurs moyens de subsistance sont directement liés à la bonne santé des ressources naturelles, côtières et marines, et ils seront donc les premiers bénéficiaires justement à avoir accès à ces ressources-là. Et donc en termes numériques, ça veut dire qu'en tout cas au niveau de l'océan Indien occidental, on va appuyer à la conservation et à l'utilisation durable de au moins 2 millions de kilomètres carrés d'ici à 2030, et ça uniquement, c'est simplement pour illustrer qu'est-ce que ça représente au niveau de l'océan Indien occidental. Si on commence à l'étendre justement au niveau panafricain, il est bien évident que ce chiffre va augmenter de manière considérable. Concernant le deuxième pilier, qui est donc atteindre un gain net d'écosystèmes critiques bleus, cela veut dire qu'il va falloir justement mettre en place des mécanismes de restauration et d'accélération de ces mécanismes-là pour faire en sorte qu'à la fois en termes d'écosystèmes des herbiers marins, des coraux, des mangroves et forêts côtières, qu'on puisse justement accélérer et aussi débloquer l'accès par exemple au carbone bleu, y compris aux crédits qui peuvent permettre de générer des ressources financières extrêmement importantes pour la région, pour les pays et pour les populations locales qui sont les premières concernées. En termes d'objectifs, cela veut dire que, encore une fois, au niveau de l'océan Indien occidental, cela représenterait un effort de conservation et de restauration d'au moins 2 millions d'hectares d'écosystèmes critiques d'ici à 2030, et ce qui permettrait de séquestrer approximativement 100 millions de tonnes de carbone dans les prochaines décennies. Aujourd'hui, la tonne de carbone africaine, et on en parlera que justement il y a aussi un sujet là-dessus, elle se vend entre 5, 10, 15 $. Donc vous pouvez déjà faire un petit calcul rapidement, 100 millions de tonnes, combien ça représente. Sauf que si en plus on arrive à faire en sorte de renégocier ces prix et les faire en sorte qu'ils représentent ou qu'ils soient mis sur les marchés à un prix juste et équitable, et beaucoup plus en ligne par rapport à la tonne de carbone qui est par exemple vendue et ou achetée en Europe, qui est plus à hauteur de 100 $, 150 $, vous pouvez imaginer à quel point ça peut devenir une source de revenus importante pour la région. Et concernant l'économie bleue, là, il s'agit d'appuyer et de vraiment protéger et de promouvoir les moyens les activités économiques de 70 millions de personnes dans l'océan Indien occidental et d'au moins de permettre à la création de 2 millions de blue jobs d'ici à 2030. via justement des mécanismes que l'on va mettre en place, à la fois des incubateurs, des accélérateurs et d'autres programmes qui vont permettre justement de faire accélérer l'entrepreneuriat bleu, et un entrepreneuriat, encore une fois, qui doit être compatible avec les objectifs de conservation et du climat. La manière dont on a justement, I'm going to switch to English now. So the way that we are actually going to operationalize the implementation of the Great Blue Wall, we've basically sort of very simplistically structured this under like 3 key pillars, and the 4th pillar, but I'll just iterate on Blue Partnerships. The Blue Planet pillar is basically the one that's going to drive the establishment of those large-scale seascapes, which means that we're going to work on marine protected areas, we're going to work on establishing more LMMAs, so locally managed marine areas, and co-management of 30% of the ocean by 2030. The second pillar, which is Blue Nature, you will have understood that this is directly related to the conservation and restoration efforts of critical blue ecosystem. And the Blue People is about regenerative blue economic development. And Blue Partnership, if you wonder what it is, it's basically today is a very, very good illustration of what partnerships can bring to the initiative and the necessity of unlocking and accelerating those partnerships, which also include bringing in, and I know today, unfortunately, we could not really bring in additional partners because of logistical issues, but also sort of non-traditional partners coming from the tech, coming from the finance, private sector, as well as, of course, sort of civil society. Just to illustrate what has been done so far for the last couple of years, so we've, under the Blue Planet program, or sort of pillar, which directly relates to the 30 by 30 and therefore to the seascape, regenerative seascape pillar, we've pre-identified, based on sort of socio-economic analysis and ecological analysis, 11 pilot seascapes for each of the countries in the Western Indian Ocean region. And this is not an exclusive list. Obviously, you will have understood that this is just a way for us to start somewhere, because we have to start somewhere. And as you will see, for instance, I know that there is representative from Zanzibar here. We've been working extremely closely with them for the past 2 years to establish the Tanga Pemba seascapes. In Kenya as well, I know that our friends from Kenya are here, and we are also sort of gearing up to establish the Northern Kenya seascape, and we've been working with them in establishing the transboundary seascape between Kenya and Tanzania. In Mozambique, we're also supporting the establishment of the Northern Mozambique seascape, and in fact, we're just about to start also supporting the establishment of the Inyambane seascape, which is in the central of sort of southern part of the country. We've been also called by South Africa and Mozambique to support the establishment or the strengthening of the Mozambique-South Africa transboundary seascape. In Madagascar, we also intend to start working very much and very closely with the government in establishing a northern Madagascar seascape. In Grand Comore, I was just a few weeks ago here with some technical partners from government agencies, and we want also to support such an effort, looking at Grand Comore and Moheli seascape in particular eventually. In Seychelles, we've been working very closely with the government on the Mahe seascape, and in particular in establishing the very first co-management mechanism of the country, which is very exciting as well. And of course, you all know that very recently the world has agreed on the High Seas Biodiversity Treaty, and that enables now the world to start conserving and protecting biodiversity in international seas. And in particular here in the region, we feel that there is one area, which is this sort of joint managed area between Seychelles and Mauritius, including the Saïd Emalia seascape, that could also be something that we could support if there was a strong interest from the countries. Under the Blue Nature program, here, of course, you will have understood it's about ecosystem. We've mapped all the critical blue ecosystem, well, actually not all, but at least the mangroves and corals. We're just now studying a similar effort for seagrasses. We've established and supported for the last decade the first blue carbon credit mechanism in Kenya with the Mikoko Pamoja and Blue Vanga forest, and we're trying to now also to start including seagrasses as part of this blue carbon credit mechanism. We are establishing now restoration hubs and other sort of mechanisms, such as the Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund that we've run globally, and now we're establishing, for instance, a regional chapter to do that. And under the Blue People program, we've worked very extensively on blue entrepreneurship through the establishment of Seascape Blue Economy Incubator. We've launched last year an ocean venture building studio that aims at creating new startups and new ocean ventures that will respond to the opportunities and gaps that have been identified by partners and governments. And of course, we're also sort of currently building a very strong coalition of the private sector that we are hoping, together with our colleagues from UNECA and others, to also announce quite soon in the next few months in another international forum. Last but not least, on blue partnerships, we've launched recently, for instance, again, those are just illustration, right? It's not an exhaustive example of action at all, but we've launched, for instance, quite recently a Great Blue World Challenge with the World Economic Forum, and we've supported the Ocean Innovation Africa Summit earlier this year in South Africa, as well as other sort of critical activities that help accelerate that pillar, including, of course, today's, where we are extremely happy and honored to be part of this meeting. Those are some of the key government partners. And it's a growing partnership, as you will have understand, because, of course, this is not an exclusive initiative, it's an inclusive initiative. And those are some of the key sort of government-related partners that have expressed support, with whom we are working very closely. And, of course, the more things are accelerating and developing, and the more we'll work very closely with all those partners. And of course, also from civil society and the private sector, those are only sort of some of the logos of some of the very important partners from civil society with whom we've been working very closely. And I just want to acknowledge that part of those, actually, there is someone who flew all the way from Canada, Geneviève from Mission Inclusion, and thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to stop here because I don't want to lose you, and I think I've already talked a bit too much. But it goes without saying that we would be delighted, myself, of course, our partner from UNECA, Nassim, to respond to any further questions and, have bilateral or multilateral meetings with you to sort of further discuss this. And I think that's it. I hope I was not too long. Thank you so much.
Nous vous remercions beaucoup, Monsieur Thomas Bernard. Maintenant, on passe la parole à moins qu'il y ait une question par ici. Une question? Une intervention, peut-être? Ok. On poursuit avec la délégation de l'OIT sur les contributions à un avenir du travail durable.
Good morning, delegates, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the ILO, thank you for the invitation to be here for this very important initiative. My name is Gary Reinhardt. I'm based in Pretoria, South Africa, part of our technical team there. The ILO, for those of you that don't know us, is a tripartite organization made up of workers' representatives representing unions, private sector representatives, and governments. We're unique within the UN system in doing that. So we like to do things in three. So we have three presentations. We'll keep them short because time has been compressed within the conference. So we'll try and keep it short and practical. So I think in terms of, say, the ILO role within the blue economy space, I think you can move to the first slide. I'll go through these quite quickly. Please. Yeah, you can move to the le prochain. Oh, there is actually fantastic. There we go. There we go. Great. As I said, I'll go through the slides quite quickly because we have three components to the presentation. I'd like to just introduce you to the main kind of ILO approach My colleague from our International Training Centre in Turin will give some technical proposals around the training space in particular. And then finally, Mohammed Abdul Hamid, our project manager here in Comoros, will give a technical presentation on some of the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years. So from an ILO perspective within the blue economy space, obviously it's the social field, social labour area that we would see our kind of role in playing. That would involve obviously employment generation, decent work, rights, that space, social protection, critically important, skills and how skills are changing and the new types of skills needed for blue economy, green economy, dialogue, obviously extremely important, and finally health and safety. So there would be the 6 kind of areas I think that would cross-cut ILO interventions. To be practical, in terms of the outcome of the conference, a declaration is foreseen, and the work today, I think tomorrow, is the technical work that will fill into the declaration, the political declaration by actors on Wednesday. So I think a very important aspect to that declaration is the narrative around fairness, equity, and social justice, and in particular, looking at the very high concentration of different economic interests around the blue economy. A very small number of countries are highly represented in terms of fishing capacity. A very small number of companies are represented in terms of their presence within the key sectors of the blue economy. So again, I think in terms of the equity space and the equity message, I think that's very, very important in terms of the declaration. So that's the first thing. The second thing from an ILO perspective is obviously the employment generation component. Particularly tourism is a sector that we would target heavily. Let me just move on here. We would target heavily in terms of its ability to generate high levels of employment, not just high levels of employment, but entry-level employment, lower skilled employment in particular, and employment that's geographically dispersed around the country. So the employment component in tourism is particularly important. Third message would be around awareness of the commercial opportunities in the blue economy. Now, so different figures are bandied around in terms of the value of the blue economy potentially. There's different estimates by the World Bank, by the ILO itself, OECD and others. And in terms of the employment generation numbers, all are very high. The potential is very, very big, but again, we have to see that in realization capacity. One of the constraints around the commercial engagement is a difficulty in giving quantifiable data for projects and the kind of risks involved in that. And I think one of the solutions there is increased dialogue with investors, with financial institutions, with lending institutions, and increased efforts to provide quantifiable data for projects to enable those investment decisions to be made. So there's the commercial potential is enormous, but there's a gap in terms of bringing the investors and bringing bankable projects to realization. So that's very, very important. Yeah, just the last point before I hand over to colleagues, our second last point, is the resilience piece. And again, Abdul Hamid will show this a little bit in his presentation, the importance of building resilience into projects, building resilience within particularly small companies. We have developed a training module around resilience for smaller enterprises in the last 2 years, and we've been rolling it out within the region. We've done it here in Comoros. We started the pilot for that in South Africa and also in Trinidad and Tobago. Critically important, and obviously the context for that was COVID-19, and moving companies away from looking at a risk, a risk around a weather event or a political event or a conflict event into a kind of a multi-hazard view of risk, and then focusing that down in terms of what are the 2-3 key probable possible risks for an enterprise. Now that can be a really complicated, complex issue, and we'd a company, one of the big pharmaceutical companies, part of this case studies, very complicated systems around contingency and continuity, towards something very, very simple. So to give you an example of the other side of the coin, we had a case study from Fiji, a small farmer. She had 24 beehives, which were her means of production, and she made honey-based products, honey, cream, and so forth. Her 24 beehives, and this is in a half-an-hour workshop, her 24 beehives were at the bottom of a hill area susceptible to weather systems. So by moving half of her means of production, her 12 beehives, to a different part of the farm, she'd halved her risk. She also had a perishable raw material in honey. So again, moving honey to maybe her brother's place in town halved the risk. It took 30 minutes. So from very complex things to very simple things in terms of halving risk and building resilience within small enterprises. Okay, I think I'll leave it at that. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Andreas Klemmer from our International Training Centre in Turin. Andreas.
If you allow me, I'll put it on. I'm very tall, so I would have to bow here for half an hour. So very briefly, okay, I have to find the right distance. My name is Andreas Klemmer. I'm the Director Training, Global Director Training of the International Labour Organization, based in our International Training Center in Turin. We have a staff complement of about 180 people. We reach about 200,000 beneficiaries every year with our capacity development services. And I'm here to make that connection between the social dimension of sustainable blue economy development and capacity development. Let me just reiterate one point that Gary raised earlier. So the ILO is here in this event because we focus on the people pillar, if I can take the example or the reference from the previous presenter. So we would emphasize on the social dimension of sustainable blue economy development in complement or in collaboration with other UN agencies that might emphasize more on the environmental dimension of sustainable blue economy development. And more in particular, we promote the concept of decent work or social justice in the blue economy. And whether you're talking about the Blue Wall Initiative or the ILO Regional Blue Economy Program, or whether you talk about any of these development programs, usually capacity development plays a very important role. Capacity development is considered key. But the question begs, what does it mean in practice? And let me color this picture a bit further. If we take the next slide, since I'm not, am I in control? Well, if I'm in control. Great. People usually associate capacity development with training. Let's do a training program. And there's nothing wrong about it. That's true. Training is one capacity development means. But there is much more to it. What we are proposing as ILO is to basically line out your capacity development interventions across 3 levels. An individual capacity development level, an institutional capacity development, and an ecosystem or system level capacity development. And I'll just elaborate a little bit on this, what this means. At the individual level, it's usually about skills transfer. You know, I learn how to drive a car, for instance. The skill is portable. That means it is embedded in the individual and it moves with the individual. Which is also one reason why generations of capacity development programs have this problem. If you run a training of trainers, the trainer moves on, the organization stays behind without any capacity. It's portable, a very important observation. Institutional capacity development is something different. It's linked to training, but there is no training involved. For the ILO, for instance, institutional capacity is about new product development. So we would work with our local partner organizations to set up systems and approaches to offer, for instance, services in virtual reality. I just brought this headset here. Unfortunately, our Wi-Fi doesn't work very well right now. Otherwise, I would have taken you to our virtual training center after this presentation. So institutional capacity development does not equal training. Institutional capacity development is about processes, approaches, systems, tools, products that enable local organizations to perform better. And then we have ecosystem or system level capacity development. And as my previous speaker already said, ecosystem capacity development is about improving the holding capacity of the system. In this case, it could be the blue economy reference system. For instance, through knowledge management, through networking. This would be a classic ecosystem intervention. You know, there is no training here. I'm not training you, you're not training me. We are exchanging information. We connect, we improve communications and system flow. So when you design capacity development interventions to promote decent work in the blue economy, we would follow this blueprint. So we do not encourage the notion of a single level intervention or just a training seminar to combat a decent work deficit. It would have to be a combination. Here this is laid out a bit more in detail. I'll share this presentation with you after this event. I would rather want to focus a little bit in the remaining 5 minutes that I have what the differentiator is. When I look at this Blue Wall initiative, clearly connecting African island states across the region and beyond, you're looking at a program that needs to, in my view, leverage learning technology for development. A classic, let's do a seminar approach will not do the trick here. So differentiating a development cooperation program by harnessing what I call here learning for technology development. Accessibility, scalability, and impact are 3 criteria here, and I'm just using always this mobile first. A way of reaching people here in the blue economy would be by harnessing, for instance, training through mobile phones. That's the one thing you'll find invariably in every African island states. Everywhere in the world, there are more mobile phones now in the world than people, as you know. So this is a means of reaching out to people in a very accessible way. It's probably the way how young people learn. I always use this example. The other day I bought a hedge trimmer, and with my son, 16 years old, I was reading the manual, 50 pages. He was watching a YouTube video, and after 2 minutes, he got that machine running when I was still going through the first 3 pages. So the new generation learns differently, as one example, but also virtual and augmented reality as another example here. Impact in port work as one example. If you are considering port worker development programs, virtual reality is a way to go if you want to simulate, for instance, unsafe environments, if you want to simulate how you respond to an industry accident. You don't have to blow up the silo first. You can do this in virtual reality as another example. Social media and artificial intelligence as one example. We just launched our first chatbot that we call AnswerMate. You could consider in a Blue Wall initiative a chatbot that can answer you any question you always wanted to ask about the blue economy within 1 minute. Just to give you one example what the potential is in this case. Look, I don't want to steal the space of the third party in this presentation round. I just want to conclude by saying what triggers an intervention from IITC or ILO in practice. I repeat, remember we are in it for the promotion of social justice and decent work, for sustainable blue economy development. So for us, a trigger for intervention would be employment-rich growth opportunities. As Gary was just saying, promotion of coastal tourism, for instance, is an employment-intensive subsector in the European Union. For instance, more than 60% of all jobs are in coastal tourism. So employment intensity is one trigger. Another one is a decent work deficit, like in the fishery sector or in maritime transport. You have serious labor rights non-compliance. So here, a decent work deficit is a trigger for an intervention from our side. Social dialogue structures. I always take this example. The ports in African island states are one sector of the economy with a comparatively strong level of industrial dialogue and social dialogue. This is an area where the ILO would then intervene again through our social partners. So social dialogue structures for us can be a trigger for an intervention. And finally, gender equality, diversity, inclusion. Picking up on the point made earlier this morning, we are a rights-based and mission-driven organization. So we have, for instance, a port worker development program that focuses on promoting inclusion of women in port work by breaking stereotypes of what work in port means in the 21st century in a digitally transformed organization. So these are triggers that we use. In order to intervene then, there are two scenarios. One would be to plug an existing ILO tool into the Blue Wall initiative, into any program that might be run by a government, might be run by the UN partner agencies. For instance, by bringing on board training on inspectors of labor conditions on board of fishing vessels. That's a training course that will start in 2 weeks' time. It's online. Just to give you one example, so it doesn't need huge amounts of money. It doesn't require a massive investment. So if there is an issue that here's a program in the room that is focusing on labor rights in the fishing industries, there are services available for this. There is a symposium, for instance, that's on the right-hand side, the Maritime Labor Symposium, that is for legal practitioners and judges to compare case law on the application of the Maritime Labor Convention. So again, this is probably not for a rural community in an outlying island, but this would be for government counterparts, for ministries of labor, for any entity that is supposed with the application of a labor standard that has been ratified earlier. So that would be a classic case for a system-level intervention, by the way, bringing people together to compare knowledge and also reference global good practice. And not to forget, in the middle, that's an assignment we just completed in Trinidad and Tobago. We ran an institutional assessment to assess the digital readiness of a local training center. So that would be an example for institutional capacity development, trying to bring local partner organizations along the digital transformation path a few steps further. This is scenario one, and scenario two is where I hand over to my colleague from our office here in the Comoros. That would be to bundle these activities across system levels in what we will call systemic capacity development projects. I just put I had put some outlines here on the slides, but rather than talking about it in theory and abstract terms, I would pass the microphone on now to Abdul Hamid in order to describe a very concrete project to promote capacity here in the Comoros using a systems level development or a systemic development approach rather, to give you a sense of what that means when we are declinating it through to the ground. Abdul Hamid, over to you.
Merci. You give me this. That's true. Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Mon nom est Mohamed Abdelhamid et je vais vous présenter un cas concret d'un projet de coopération technique mis en œuvre par l'Organisation internationale du travail, ici aux Comores. J'ai besoin des diapos, Régie. Donc, c'est un projet qui contribue à lutter contre le changement climatique, à promouvoir renforcer la résilience et promouvoir une transition juste vers un monde du travail plus vert et la création des opportunités décentes dans le secteur de la pêche en particulier. Ce projet a 4 résultats spécifiques à atteindre et cible l'objectif de développement durable numéro 8 avec une signification très importante sur les aspects genre. Alors, l'approche utilisée pour ce projet, c'est l'approche de l'OIT, une approche systémique qui consiste à mener des interventions au niveau macro, au niveau méso et au niveau micro, avec ces 4 objectifs spécifiques. Le premier objectif du niveau macro, il s'agit ici de doter le gouvernement comorien avec les institutions représentant les travailleurs et les employeurs d'un plan d'action sur la promotion du travail décent. Et le deuxième et troisième résultat, il s'agit ici de renforcer ces institutions des travailleurs et des employeurs sur les aspects de l'économie bleue et leur permettre d'élaborer par eux-mêmes des notes d'orientation politique pour pouvoir orienter leurs membres et proposer des mesures au niveau du gouvernement. Et le dernier résultat ici, il s'agit de la création des opportunités d'emploi dans les secteurs de l'économie bleue par les jeunes et les femmes, par l'innovation et l'amélioration de la productivité. Alors, je vais directement, vu le temps limité de la présentation, passer directement aux réalisations concrètes de ce projet-là. Et donc, le résultat numéro 1 pour l'élaboration du plan d'action, voici donc le processus qui a été utilisé pour pouvoir accompagner le gouvernement et les institutions pour élaborer ce plan d'action. D'abord, on a commencé par des recherches, en menant deux recherches. La première, il s'agit de l'analyse situationnelle rapide des liens entre le climat, la protection de l'environnement et l'emploi décent, pour essayer de voir quelles sont les opportunités, quels sont les défis qui sont là, qui peuvent être transformés en opportunités d'emploi. Et cette analyse-là a permis aussi de dégager quels sont les secteurs prioritaires de l'économie bleue sur la promotion du travail décent. Et on en a trouvé que le premier secteur, c'est la pêche, le deuxième, c'est le tourisme côtier, et le troisième, c'est le traitement et la valorisation des déchets ici aux Comores. La deuxième recherche, c'est l'évaluation de l'environnement favorable aux entreprises durables pour une transition juste dans l'économie bleue aux Comores. Donc, avec ces deux recherches, constitue la base de la suite de ce processus. C'est donc la base de toutes les consultations qui ont été menées à travers les îles Comores, les différents dialogues qui ont été menés pour essayer d'élaborer ce plan d'action. Et suite à cela, il y a eu la mise en place des mécanismes de dialogue social par un arrêté ministériel du ministère chargé de l'emploi et du travail, qui a mis en place un comité national tripartite de dialogue social avec comme mission de superviser depuis l'élaboration jusqu'à l'adoption formelle de ce plan d'action. Et ce comité, c'est un comité tripartite qui est constitué par le gouvernement avec 3 ministères représentés dans ce comité, à savoir le ministère des Affaires étrangères, le ministère du Travail et de l'Emploi et le ministère en charge de la pêche, du tourisme et de l'environnement. Par la suite, il y a eu plusieurs consultations qui ont été menées, plusieurs dialogues qui ont été menés avec ces recherches-là, jusqu'à arrêter les axes de ce plan d'action. On a aussi mené un dialogue social de haut niveau sur la transition juste pour essayer d'émerger le sentiment d'appropriation nationale sur cette économie bleue. À la suite de ce dialogue social de haut niveau, il y a eu une déclaration très forte des acteurs du monde du travail sur la transition écologique et suivi de la validation technique de ce plan d'action. Et à la fin, on a l'adoption formelle par le gouvernement et les institutions représentant les travailleurs et les employeurs comoriens. Donc ici, je présente un peu les documents de recherche qui ont été élaborés, l'analyse situationnelle rapide, l'évaluation de l'environnement favorable aux entreprises, et puis le plan d'action pour la promotion du travail décent dans l'économie bleue. Alors, quelques photos aussi, le jour du dialogue social tripartite de haut niveau, où ici on a la présence du ministre en charge du travail et de l'emploi, et aussi le ministre chargé de la pêche, du tourisme et de l'environnement, à la fois porte-parole du gouvernement. Et l'autre image, c'est le jour de l'adoption formelle de ce plan d'action avec la signature de la déclaration tripartite. Au niveau du résultat 2 et 3, il s'agit ici de développer les capacités des institutions, à savoir le MODEC qui représente les employeurs ici au Comores et la CTC qui veut dire Confédération des travailleurs et travailleuses comoriens qui représente aussi les travailleurs. Donc on en a renforcé leurs capacités par l'amélioration de la sensibilisation des connaissances sur la transition juste. Ils ont eu beaucoup d'appui venant des experts de l'OIT et ils ont pu eux-mêmes élaborer ces notes d'orientation qui ont beaucoup de propositions au niveau de leurs membres et aussi de propositions à l'endroit du gouvernement. Et au niveau du résultat 4, au niveau macro, il s'agit ici des actions sur le terrain de démonstration qui ont été menées en s'appuyant sur 3 leviers. Le premier levier, c'est le développement des capacités des entreprises. Le deuxième levier, l'amélioration des compétences des jeunes et des femmes par l'entrepreneuriat. Et le troisième levier, c'est le développement des coopératives spécifiquement pour les femmes dans les métiers de la pêche. Donc ici, on a le renforcement des capacités des entreprises où on a introduit un programme de formation entreprises durables et résilientes. Ce programme-là permet aux entreprises, aux petites et moyennes entreprises, de pouvoir survivre et s'épanouir en temps de crise, que ce soit des crises climatiques ou des crises liées à des catastrophes naturelles ou des crises sanitaires ou des crises sociales. Donc, avec ce programme, on a d'abord formé 15 formateurs certifiés sur ce programme EDR. Et par la suite, ces 15 formateurs ont accompagné 144 PME et coopératives formelles et informelles à élaborer des stratégies de résilience en cas de crise. Donc, le résultat final de ce programme, c'est l'élaboration de la stratégie de résilience contenant un plan d'action pour le traitement des risques, plan de réponse aux incidents et un plan de rétablissement. Pour le levier développement de l'entrepreneuriat dans le secteur de l'économie bleue, on a renforcé un programme d'entrepreneuriat GERM de l'OIT qui existe déjà dans le pays en introduisant 2 autres outils, à savoir le GERM ouvert qui cible les entreprises écologiques et aussi le GERM niveau 1 qui cible les femmes ou les hommes non instruits et qui ont des activités au niveau de la pêche, qui développent des activités. Et donc, dans ce programme, on a formé 19 formatrices et formateurs certifiés GERM. Et ces formateurs-là, à l'heure actuelle, ils ont déjà accompagné 45 jeunes et femmes entrepreneurs potentiels évoluant dans les secteurs de l'économie bleue et aussi 55 jeunes et femmes non instruites qui ont déjà des activités en cours pour leur permettre de développer leurs activités de pêche. À la fois, puisqu'il s'agissait de l'amélioration des compétences, on a aussi formé les enseignants, on a formé 6 enseignants des instituts de formation technique et professionnelle. Par exemple, comme l'École nationale de pêche, ils ont donc ce programme entrepreneuriat pour pouvoir accompagner les jeunes ressortissants de l'Institut de formation. Et en dernier lieu, concernant le développement des coopératives dans le secteur pêche, donc ici c'est un cas d'une transition juste et d'intégration du genre que je vais vous présenter ici. Le projet a intervenu sur 3 sites où il existe déjà un programme de cogestion marine qui consiste à faire des fermetures et des ouvertures pour essayer de protéger un peu cet environnement marin, puisque avec ces images, avec ces femmes que vous voyez ici, ce sont des femmes qu'à chaque marée basse, ils vont à la mer pour essayer de capter des poulpes, des petits poissons, en utilisant des techniques jugées destructives de l'environnement. C'est-à-dire ils utilisent des harpons, ils utilisent des filets à petits mailles. Et le fait qu'à chaque marée basse, ils vont à la mer, en marchant sur le récif, ils détruisent aussi le récif corallien. Donc, avec ce programme de cogestion marine, on a instauré des fermetures de 4 mois. Et pendant ces 4 mois-là, on n'a pas proposé des alternatives pour ces femmes-là. Et au moment de l'ouverture, vous pouvez voir la photo numéro 3 avec tous ces hommes qui affluent massivement. Au moment de l'ouverture, on a beaucoup plus d'hommes des villages avoisinants qui arrivent. Et donc, la capture de poulpes s'est transformée en une compétition d'hommes, ce qui n'avantage pas, encore une fois, pour ces femmes. Et donc, le projet a donc sélectionné toutes ces femmes-là, les a formées sur les techniques de séchage et de fumage. Ici, on peut voir un groupe de femmes en juin à l'École nationale de pêche. Il y a dans l'île de Moïli aussi des femmes du village de Barakani. Et ici, à la Grande Comore, des femmes du village de Malé dans la formation des techniques de fumage et de séchage de poissons. Par la suite, ces femmes-là ont été structurées en coopératives en utilisant les outils de l'OIT de création et de gestion des coopératives, accompagnées, équipées avec des fonds de démarrage jusqu'au lancement de leurs activités, jusqu'à la commercialisation de leurs produits. Donc ici, je vous présente ces coopératives-là. On a 4 coopératives de femmes qui sont déjà en activité à l'heure actuelle. Voilà, je vous remercie. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des questions.
Nous vous remercions pour cette présentation. Je remarque qu'on est en avance par rapport au timing proposé. Je ne sais pas s'il y a des réactions, soit ici avec les officiels ou avec les experts. On vous donne la parole, puisqu'on est supposé finir à midi avant. Si parmi vous, les officiels, vous avez des remarques, des observations, des suggestions à proposer, ou dans l'auditoire, s'il y a des remarques à faire, c'est le moment, on a un bon quart d'heure. Sinon, on va aller au déjeuner, s'il n'y a pas de remarques. Chef. Ok, apparemment tout était parfait. Donc nous vous invitons au déjeuner dans la grande salle du resto. Merci, on se retrouve à 14h pour la suite sur la table ronde sur les spécificités des États insulaires africains. C'est à ce moment-là où il y aura l'ouverture officielle avec le ministre des Affaires étrangères. Nous vous remercions et à tout à l'heure. Bon appétit.